Welcome to this video on reading to write a journal article critique. In this video, we'll cover how to critique an article and how to write a report about critiquing an article. And I want to use Bloom's taxonomy of thinking skills as a way of sequencing our review, but also as a way of thinking about how we write. So in the 1950s, Benjamin Bloom and his team classified thinking skills in a systematic hierarchical way. He divided the least complex thinking skills, knowledge, comprehension, and application, from the higher order thinking skills, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. What's so important about his system is that each level depends on the one below being successfully completed. So, for example, you won't be able to analyze if you don't have understanding. So, although Bloom's purpose was to evaluate cognitive abilities in school-going children, the taxonomy is useful for thinking about writing and for articulating what we're doing in writing, how we move from description to analysis. Now, over the years, the taxonomy has been critiqued, reviewed, changed, and the most recent taxonomy has an added category called create. And creating is about putting all the elements together and coming up with something original and innovative. So the highest order thinking skill is creativity. But for my purposes, for writing purposes, the old taxonomy is really useful. So I want to show you how to use Bloom's taxonomy to prepare a review. And these would be your notes before you prepare the final document. So I'll talk you through my notes of reading this particular article, teaching all students how to find the main idea in a text. And I'm going to use Bloom's taxonomy. So I would always begin by noting the referencing details. So what we begin with is providing the information about what the article is about without interpretation. Here we are just providing a summary of the article. When and where was it published? Who were the authors? How have they articulated the research problem and other aspects of the paper? Where does the research take place? What is it about? What's the purpose of the research? What methodologies were used? What are the key findings? So you're providing the facts of the article. So here's my example in my notes, teaching students to find the main idea in a text. In this article, the author comes from Israel and has written previously on issues of reading, because I looked that up. Although I don't know the journal, I can see that this author has published before on this topic. The research problem is identified as the main idea of a text that is the most important part of reading, but students find it difficult to find this main idea. It's not a primary research study, and the author uses secondary sources as evidence. With the next level, we're moving into trying to make sure my reader will understand what this paper is about. So here I'm interpreting at a lower level what the main message of the article is. I'm identifying the key message this article is about, and I'm making sense of the article for the reader, helping my reader to understand. This paper is about teaching students to locate the main idea of a text. This is an article about a teaching strategy. So that's what I'm explaining for my readers. In terms of application, what I would do here is take things from the article, quotes or examples, and use that in my writing to provide evidence for this summary, for this explanation of what the article is about. So a couple of quotes might help with this interpretation. So in my example, these quotes illustrate the main argument of the paper. All students, both good and weak, should be offered explicit instruction on how to locate and process the main idea. Students who get explicit instruction are not only able to process the text coherently, but are also able to cope with incoherent texts and even to rewrite them successfully. Now, when we move on to analysis, we're moving into the higher order thinking skills now. Analysis is about breaking up a concept into component parts. Once they are separate, we can then interrogate each aspect and begin comparing them, classifying them, contrasting them. So by breaking them up, we examine them in turn. So we might break a paper up into what was the design, what was the methodology, what were the findings, how do each of these sections relate to one another? Do the conclusions emerge logically out of the analysis? Is the organization of the paper and accessibility of the paper in line with what the authors were trying to get across? So here's my example. There are 3 sections to this paper: an introduction where the author sets up the main argument, that the topic sentence is the main idea of the text. In section 2, locating the main idea, the author advocates a number of strategies, scanning an article for transition words such as but, however, or yet, which indicates a transition about what is known and leads to the writer's main idea or argument. She uses examples from texts to show how this works in increasingly complicated extracts. In section 3, instructional implications and suggestions, the author relates her argument to teaching. So you can see I've broken up the paper into these 3 components. I've identified what's gone into each of these components. And what I may argue later on is that although this paper is about teaching, the section on teaching is quite small. So you can see how breaking it up allows you to develop some critique. When it comes to synthesis, what we're doing now is taking these component parts, putting them back together, but with the insight we've gained from the analysis. So we combine our analysis into conclusions about the paper under review. And I would suggest that you decide to develop 2 to 3 points about this article. What can I say about this article? And you can always use other texts, other books, to help you provide critical insight. So from the 3 sections of the paper, these are the 3 points I can identify. Students find the language of topic sentence difficult. A better way of expressing topic sentence is main idea or writer's argument. Scan reading to find transition words such as but, however, or yet can help the reader identify the main argument of a paper. Evaluation involves making academic judgments. So academic judgments are judgments based on reasoning and reading, on the analysis and synthesis in terms of internal and external evidence. So internal evidence is what you can see in the paper. External evidence is where you are drawing from outside sources. So this is where we outline our assessment of the study. Has it answered all the questions? Was it set up logically? Do the findings emerge out of the analysis? And we may want to comment on the study's contribution to the research literature and whether or not you were convinced by this study. So in my example, when I begin to evaluate it, I find the research problem really significant because I have also found the language of topic sentence confusing for the students I teach. I also find this article relevant because I'm interested in new and different ways of teaching, reading and writing. This argument is one I haven't encountered before. I'm still very cautious about the findings. Will this strategy apply in every case? In technically difficult or jargon-filled papers, will the transition words be present or linked to the main idea? I would have liked more examples from journal articles in the paper. Although the author refers to journal articles, the examples presented seem to be popular articles, and it makes me wonder if this strategy can be applied elsewhere. I try this strategy on 1 or 2 journal articles and find the transition words while and after do link to the main idea of the text. But I need more research. I need to do a bit more research before I'll be convinced. But I find the idea and argument interesting and one that could potentially make a breakthrough for students who struggle with reading. So that's what I would say, is that I'm cautiously optimistic about this particular article. I would have a critique, but ultimately be positive about it. Other questions, of course, there are lots of questions you can ask, but these are some questions you might want to think about. One of the first things you can look at is your own experience and then try and develop a critique using other sources from that. You could also ask yourself, what is clear to me about this paper and what do I need clarified? How can I connect core ideas from this text to other texts? And what have I learned that is new in this text? So everything I've done so far would be a pre-writing activity. And I would take these notes that I've written informally, focusing on ideas, and then construct the review. And in constructing the review, I would use much more formal language and perhaps leave out I. Your notes might also be longer. For the purpose of this video, I've left out quite a bit of the summary. So here's what I would do in writing the review is I would work out what my argument was and a structure for the review. So as I've said to you, my argument is that I'm cautiously optimistic. I like a lot of the ideas, but I'm not convinced by others. So I would have a title, and you could, have a title that refers to the topic, an introduction where you orient the reader to the paper, a summary of the paper using quotes and examples, then move into your analysis and synthesis, break things up, have a couple of points that you can use to compare, then evaluation, which is the overall assessment of the paper, which can be positive. An article critique doesn't have to be negative. A conclusion, which is an overview of the review, and then your references. So you want to provide evidence from the source text and from other texts to back up your argument and your claims. And use interesting headings to reflect the argument that you're making in the paper. Just some final thoughts here. Reading is a form of intellectual work, and intellectual work requires a willingness to persevere through difficulties. So academic reading is often quite difficult, but if you have strategies and you persevere, you can work through the most complicated of texts. You might want to read further on critical reading. There are lots of texts out there on how to read academic papers. Elder and Paul are particularly good at providing strategies, so you might want to look at their papers. But I hope that you have found something of value in this video. What I've tried to do is to show you how to use Bloom's taxonomy to move from summary description to analysis and evaluation of an article in a review. So Bloom's taxonomy has the lower order thinking skills as knowledge, comprehension, and application. And those lower order thinking skills are really important because they provide the knowledge that your reader needs to understand the higher order thinking skills of analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So if you don't provide some description, some information, your reader will find it hard to understand your analysis. So summary and examples from the source text provide your reader with the lower order comprehension skills. Analysis is breaking up a concept into its component parts so that you can compare and contrast. Synthesis is pulling it all back together again, but with insight and drawing conclusions. Evaluation is making an academic judgment based on your analysis and synthesis and on internal and external evidence. But once your thinking is done, you'll take your notes, structure them, and write your review in a more formal form. And you'll notice that it's much easier to write the review once you've done comprehensive notes like this. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it helps you to write an article critique, and I hope it eases your journey through graduate school. And please watch the other videos in this series on critical writing.